What are some of the non-standard conditions that exist in work activities? Well, first there is the failure to perform an activity. There's also the timing. For example, an activity might have to be performed at a certain point in time and it is not performed at that time. There's how long it takes the activity to be performed. It may take longer for some reason. And this is very true in accounting processes because in transaction processing, you sometimes don't know how long it's going to take to process a supplier invoice, for example, until you open up that invoice or see the invoice and see how many line items there are to process. It's also important to understand if we have some non-standard condition in a particular activity, can it have a negative impact downstream? And we want to try to prevent that. And so the idea of understanding non-standard conditions is to create a standard response. What do we do? What does a particular person do when these non-standard conditions are encountered? What standard work does and responding to non-standard conditions also does is it prevents firefighting and scrambling around. It creates more of a routine and a cadence. Another aspect of the do step is troubleshooting. Okay, problems will occur during the workday, and it's important to develop standard responses to problems as they occur. Again, this prevents firefighting. So what are some of the typical problems that may occur? And you can also look at all these as non-standard conditions. One example is demand may change. You can plan the day and plan the work that gets done, but something may happen in that the priority of the demand must change. So first of all, how is this change in priority of demand going to be recognized, and how is it going to be reprioritized? There needs to be some method to do that. The variability of processing times. If tasks take longer than planned due to complexity, what happens? So if I'm working in a specific accounting process and I encounter some complexity and it's going to take me longer to finish the task I'm working on, how do we signal in the process that this is going on, and what is the countermeasure? How do we respond to that? Capacity. There can be unexplained changes in capacity during the day. People may get sick and have to go home for some reason. In typical administrative processes like accounting, sometimes people get pulled into urgent meetings that weren't planned. That's going to reduce capacity. If capacity is reduced and it's significant that it can't be absorbed, for example, in that 20% buffer capacity, if the work cannot be absorbed in that 20% buffer capacity, what are we going to do? And then waste. When we encounter waste, what do we do? For example, and I'll talk about this later, if I'm processing an invoice in accounts payable and I encounter a defect, a quality problem that prevents me from completely entering the invoice, what do I do? What's the standard response? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we want to avoid firefighting. But if you think about firefights, or firefighting and firemen, they don't just rush in to a fire. They have a standard way to go in to deal with the fire. They assess the situation and then they create a plan. And responding to troubleshooting is much like professional firefighting.